Welcome to Better Mental Health, a podcast for men looking to build a resource and community around destigmatizing mental health. I'm Jamie.
I'm Blake.
I'm Blair. In this episode, we decided it was about time to discuss Christian Science, which is the religion we all grew up in. Although this is a lesser-known religion, some might call it a cult. We hope that this discussion will pertain to anyone who grew up in a religious background and eventually began to question their worldview.
What is this religion, Christian Science? So it was founded originally in the 1800s by a woman named Mary Baker Eddy, who really was the leader, the founder of Christian Science, and is a very well-known name within the religion. I'll just speak to kind of how I see Christian Science, and then maybe we can all kind of give our own definition of what it is to us and how to kind of describe it. So definitely a small religion. It's shrinking today. But to me, when I think of Christian Science, some of the main tenets would be not recognizing things that are material and seeing yourself as a spiritual being. And by having a true understanding of your spiritual being, that can allow you to dissipate those material thoughts, things that would be like sin, disease, and death. And so a lot of times you'll hear for a lot of things, one of the things that people know about Christian Science is, oh, you guys are the ones who don't go to doctors, right? Which is generally pretty true, because Christian Scientists believe that if you're relying on doctors or medical treatment, that is acknowledging the material, that is acknowledging that this sickness or whatever it is that's ailing you, it gives it reality.
Power.
It gives it power. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so by having a deeper understanding of your spiritual self will actually help you to realize that that is simply not real. And so you'll hear of Christian Scientists giving healing testimonies where they came to this deeper understanding about their spiritual self and then had a healing of some kind. Sometimes it could be as simple as a cut on their arm. Sometimes you hear testimonies of people curing themselves of cancer. So it's
losing their keys.
Yeah.
That's
You'll hear all kinds of testimonies, both small and large. But when I think of Christian Science, I think a lot of that kind of idea of your spiritual being is a key tenet of Christian Science. So I'll kick the ball over to Jamie next to give your definition.
I mean, I think that was an incredibly good, succinct summary. So kudos to you for being able to summarize something that's so complex. Also, in theory, when you describe it the way you do, it's like, that would be pretty fucking cool if that worked. But I think that the thing I would want to add is that, I spent the majority of my childhood and young adult life trying to do what Christian Science promises and not experiencing one of those sort of miraculous healings that so many people claim to have had. And I don't doubt that maybe some people have had some miraculous changes in their physical experience. I believe that there's some power of mind over matter. I don't know that the way that Christian Science prescribes that concept is universal and applicable to everybody. And I think that for most people, what I experience is I would try to do what I saw so many people saying that they were doing and would end up failing and feeling ashamed of myself for not measuring up to what I was seeing other people do. So it's a complicated religion to grow up in. And in my opinion, it's a cult, but I think it's a cult because you have a religious leader, a woman named Mary Baker Eddy, who I think a lot of people think that the way that she did things is universally applicable to everybody. And therefore you have to fit in this mold of what she designed. And if you're not doing it that way, then you're not doing it the right way. And a lot of people make it known within the religion that you should try and figure it out this way. There's something called practitioners, where you work with someone who's trying to pray for you and get you to be healed and to get your mindset right for that healing. But yeah, it's complicated, and it gets into a lot of mental health struggles and things that we all experience. So Blair, what about you? What's your
man, this is I'm like from the beginning, from our very first episode, I was like, this needs to be a full episode, at least one. I mean, the thing is, there's so much to talk about within this.
We could do more than one. we can do.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to for a lot of the different things that need to be discussed within this subject. But yeah, you mentioned practitioners, and I want to make sure that it is known that instead of doctors, we go to work on our spiritual understanding.
We went to.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we're not speaking for the religion currently.
Christian scientists go to practitioners to get a better understanding of the reality, which is spiritual. The way that was, I think, a teacher that I had in Sunday school, I remember she used to describe it as like, instead of turning to God on your deathbed, you turn to God like before, not as a last resort, but as a first resort. And I was like, okay, but like that's like very simplified, because then that's saying, oh, you're going to God for healing. That's not what Christian Science is. It's more of a trying to, again, I think we already discussed it, but a better understanding of your spiritual self, and understanding that somehow heals the physical, that's like where the part that doesn't align with me, right? Because I just can't wrap my head around how that aligns. But
yeah, I think the logical brain, I mean, maybe we're all three pretty logical people, but I feel like the logical brain has a hard time wrapping around the concept that if I just somehow get in line spiritually with the right thoughts, that my physical manifestation will reflect that, while also understanding the logic that the physical isn't real. So it's like there's this mental gymnastics that there's some way to change the physical to reflect the spiritual, but also the physical isn't real. So like it's very convoluted.
It's just described like that. Kind of
the confusion. Yeah. But it was interesting. So we all did some homework in preparation for this episode, and there's a video that we watched, which we can link in the description of this video. But it was interesting to me to kind of have the realization that when Christian Science became a thing, when Mary Baker Eddy, so the story is she, had this thing where she slipped on the ice and was basically crippled, and had this, she was reading her Bible and was reading about Jesus basically healing people. And that was kind of what caused her to realize that she could act in the same way that Jesus did. And this understanding allowed her to be healed, and then ultimately started the religion because of this. And it was interesting to learn why it became so popular at that time. And it did become pretty quickly popular, was because at that point in time, going to the doctor was more dangerous than just doing nothing in many cases. So if you were sick and you went to a doctor, they maybe would have tried something experimental, something untested, and that might have actually caused you more harm. And so at a time when there was very little trust in the healthcare field at that point, there was very little trust in doctors and medicine. Of course, people were looking for alternatives. And so the religion became popular. And part of it is kind of cool. And it's just, part of it is a mindset shift of, I'm not going to acknowledge that sin, disease, these things can affect me. And I do think there is something to just having a good, positive mindset. And I think that does help you in life. However, where it becomes dangerous, which I'm sure we'll get into more, is where you're so reliant on that you start to ignore actual physical symptoms and things that are just not going away, because you are so bought into this that you think that if you continue to try to have a deeper understanding of your spirituality, that eventually you will be healed of whatever it is. So when it comes to really dangerous medical ailments, that's when it can get pretty scary. So,
I think you mentioned Reliance. That is, in this video, the guy, the YouTube creator who did really excellent research, honestly, he was talking about that is what the religion proposes, or that's what the religion expects of its followers, is like radical reliance, meaning nothing else but this religion, the thoughts expressed by this woman, Mary Baker Eddy, in the book that she wrote, which it goes hand in hand with the Bible. It's called The Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. It's like, when I say that, I know, maybe you guys feel the same way, but I feel like I have to say, by Mary Baker Eddy, the discoverer and founder of Mary Baker Eddy. It's like, it's in Sunday school, in church, it's always said that way. So it's like, my brain can't even say Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures without saying her name. I think that's part of the cult thing. But yeah, the radical reliance is where it really does hit some really difficult aspects.
The other thing in regards to Mary Baker Eddy, one of the things that like makes it cultish is I don't know if some Sunday schools don't do this and some churches don't do this, but like at summer camp we would do this where if it was a Mary Baker Eddy hymn that we were singing, we would all stand, but if it was like not, we would sit. And it's like somehow respecting Mary Baker Eddy to stand. Like why are we doing this? You don't remember that? Yeah.
No, I went to the same summer camp. We went to the summer camp in Michigan. Yeah.
Yeah, we did that too, Jamie, at our Sunday school. We did that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How did I not realize this?
It's funny. I think going into a little bit of like the promises of Christian Science, and I think we all have our own experiences with witnessing people and ourselves relying on it and it failing us. I think that's a big part of sort of the mental health journey of Christian Science. I think it's super traumatic when you are promised and told that something is going to work and then it doesn't, and humans being humans, shit gets real. It gets really, really hard to navigate through that. So I'm curious if we should like dive into some of our own personal experiences and talk about that. Or
absolutely. I was going to say I think the trauma and the mental health side of things is, as a kid, I remember so many different times of, oh, this thing's bothering me, and being told like, oh, well, that's not real. And I think Jamie, I think we've talked about it specifically of that, how difficult that is as a child to hear that, instead of having your experience, your observations of like what's going on with you being validated. It's just totally nope.
Yeah. And I remember my mom, every time something would happen that was like somewhat dangerous or accidental, or like some sort of injury would happen, my mom would immediately go, "Accidents are unknown to the divine mind." And that was like this initial response that she always had. It's just like ingrained in my brain.
Would your parents mute the TV when a drug commercial would come on?
Yeah,
like a 100%. Medicine commercial.
For
Again,
sure.
Because it was all about not wanting to acknowledge the material. And by allowing whatever it was, it could be like Tylenol. Yeah. This is going to cure headaches or whatever. And that, just listening to that was kind of like an acknowledgement that like the headache was real and this medication was also real. And so I know it wasn't just my family. I know a lot of families did this, where you're watching TV as a family, watching a show, and then commercials come on. There's some drug advertisement that pops on, and then the TV gets immediately muted or the channel is changed, just so that there's no acknowledgement of that.
That example is a good example of how dangerous Christian Science is, and how not wanting to talk about anything like symptom related, drug related, physical related. If you were going through something and experiencing something, it was the norm to not talk about it with anybody other than maybe a practitioner. And that practitioner would only give you spiritual advice. So if you were going through something, you see it a lot with like our parents' generation. Blair, I'm guessing you could talk to this a little bit more than all of us, but it's like a lot of people who are going through something won't share it with anybody and won't take any practical advice, because then they're giving it power. So then they silently suffer.
And that's where the shame comes in, right? The shame of, I don't want to share this thing that's bothering me, because that's acknowledging that I have not gotten to the level of Christian Science understanding that I need to be at to have a healing. Yeah. And so I think there's some shame and embarrassment built around that sort of becomes part of the community. And so, nobody wants to speak about these things unless it's a healing and they're giving a testimonial.
Yeah, exactly. I have an example in my own life that I'm thinking of, which is, I have a number of examples, but I remember when I was younger, I was skateboarding and I had rolled my ankle, and it was like kind of injured and not that bad, so I just ignored it. But then I was skateboarding more, And eventually that same rolled ankle, I rolled over again with my skateboard, and I am 100% certain I broke some bones in my foot. And I didn't do anything about it because I thought that I needed to pray about it. I didn't talk to my parents about it because I thought that that would give it power. I just went on with my life, like thinking that the right thing to do is to quietly pray about it or call a practitioner if I need to call a practitioner, and just basically just ended up letting a broken foot heal. And
which I'm sure was excruciatingly painful, that you just had to hide that pain.
Yeah.
Because you're not taking any pain medication.
No. Yeah. I cracked a rib while skateboarding. Same thing. I let the rib heal on its own. And I remember go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say how did you even know that you broke something or, cracked a rib?
Yeah. I mean, so that example is pretty obvious to me. So I was skateboarding on a rail, and I was like sliding down the rail, and my skateboard slipped out from under me. And so then my chest became sort of like parallel with the rail and landed on my chest in this specific spot. Felt the crack. It hurt to breathe. It hurt to eat. And then it was healing. And I had a friend come up behind me and give me this bear hug. Ooh. And like grab me. And I was like, no. And I heard it go, a little pop. And it re-cracked in that spot. It just like, I can feel sort of like where it happened right here.
Oh my God.
Like, ouch. Lumpiness in my, so it's just
that was kind of the thing, right? Part of it was like, as a kid, you kind of just accept pain. Like, you just accept like that, well, I'm just going to like power my way through this, because you're not feeling comfortable sharing that, like, this is still bothering me. I mean, I'm just thinking about like having like a headache and being home from school, and I didn't know Advil was even like a thing. It was.
I know. It would have been amazing to have Advil as a kid.
And as an adult, I'm like, wow. 10 minutes later, I'm like, wow, headache's gone.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Amazing.
How old were you when you first took your like a first pill?
I mean, probably 20.
Yeah, same. Yeah. I think it was on a bro trip for me that I took an Advil after a hangover on a bro trip.
That's all I was gonna ask.
And I was like, wow, this is fucking awesome.
It's like magic.
Yeah.
I think mine was, I think I was 24, and at that point, or 25 maybe. But at that point my dad had died, and I was already like, that's a kind of another thing I wanted to talk about, like your guys's, exit from the religion. But I think I was never fully bought in to the actual teachings. There were moments throughout my life where I was like, all right, I can get behind this. And there are still moments in my life where like the tenets, like the main tenets, I'm like mental healing type situation still ring true to some degree, or us being spiritual. Like I still believe that some of that stuff to an extent, but the radical reliance thing I think is the dangerous part. But yeah, so my dad had suddenly passed away, and I even say passed away, like that's a remnant of Christian Science. You don't say death, because death isn't real. But so he didn't die, he passed away. And then I had a headache. It was probably some hangover. Jamie, I think that's probably the first time I took one too. And I remember taking it and having it go away within 10 minutes. I was like, what have I been doing my whole life? I've had so many headaches throughout my life.
Yeah.
That I could have healed or had cured in 10 minutes. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Tylenol too. Like I had so many fevers, so many experiences where it just would have been so nice to have a fever reducer or pain medication. So I have a 3-year-old, and our kid has gone through some fevers and just like normal stuff, and teething, super painful. I'm sure that when I was that age, I went through all those experiences, and my parents probably just let me suffer through those, and like could have given me that stuff, but Christian Science. So our pain tolerance as Christian scientists I think we have a very high pain tolerance.
Yeah. I mean, there would be times that, like you were talking about having a fever or cold or something, and you would just suffer through it the whole time. Yeah. Like you would just wait it out.
I still find myself doing that without realizing it. Like I forget that I can take drugs. Yeah. And I just am like,
it's still deeply ingrained in there. I will say the one thing to its credit is I think there's something to be said about not always just immediately relying on medication. Oh, I have like a little bit of a twinge or something, or a little bit of pain, I'm just going to immediately jump to taking a pill or whatever. So as with all things, there's a balance. The radical reliance on Christian Science can be very dangerous. And we talked about the shame around that as well. But I do appreciate the fact that I'm not just trained to immediately jump to taking like medication for everything that pops up. Nice to know that I have those things. I have those options now, and those have been very helpful. But, I don't want to be overly reliant on that either.
I totally agree. I think there's also something to be said about when you do see maybe there's still some remnant of Christian Science in my own experience, but when I do see some, commercial for a drug or something, some pharmaceutical drug, I kind of envision some people who did not grow up with Christian Science, obviously, but I envision them watching that and being like, oh, I could have that, some like kind of WebMD type thing. And then it's putting that in their head. And then, it could potentially, with my belief that there is still some semblance of reality with like mind and creating an experience. Like I do think that there's some danger in reliance completely on science and pharmaceutical stuff.
I imagine, especially so with people, I think is hypochondriac the right word? Like if you kind of just like fall in that fearful mindset of thinking that you're always going to get sick and that there's always going to be something wrong, that it would be really easy to fall into that trap of thinking that all these different things, sort of symptom relievers, will fix you. And I think that the other thing that I think has been a benefit has been realizing that I think a lot of people know the medical system is broken, but I think that coming from the Christian Science perspective, jumping into it later in life, it's very eye-opening to see how broken it is. And I feel like I've approached it more carefully as a result, because it's just like, what the fuck is going on?
I completely agree. I think that's something I've experienced in, like just jumping into the medical world. I'm like, all right, I need to start seeing doctors. I haven't been to one my whole life. I had started to get all the shots and stuff, but just starting to experience the insurance game, I was like, none of this makes sense. And it's 100% a scam.
Totally. Yeah. I've got a family member who is, deep in the throes of the healthcare system right now, and just discovering like how you go to one doctor and, oh, you need to go see a specialist for this. And then that specialist says, nope, you need to go see this other specialist, and kind of goes in circles. And then it seems like you have to fill out the same paperwork everywhere you go. And then they never have the information from there's all kinds of broken issues in the healthcare system too. So it's not like that side is perfect, but it is kind of interesting to have the perspective of both sides, of a side where it was completely unreliant on healthcare and the medical industry, and now trying to navigate it today. It is super confusing, and I don't know if anybody has it truly figured out, but maybe those who have been in it for their whole lives know a little bit better than we do.
They can navigate it for sure.
I think other countries make it easier than the United States.
That was another thing. I remember being on a call with people in my company where we were switching to a new like healthcare thing at the startup that I was at. And some of the people who were, working they were from Spain or something. I was chatting with them as we were discussing how it all works. And they're like, honestly, I'm just going to fly back to Spain. Like, it's so much cheaper to go back there and get everything covered and then fly back. I was like, yep, I would do the same if that was a possibility. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just heard a story real quick. This guy who had to get, or was going in for a doctor's visit. So he went to his doctor in network. They asked if he wanted to get some lab work done. He decided he was going to do it. And even though his doctor and the clinic was in his network, where they sent the lab, where they did the lab work, was not in his network. And so he got this bill for $12,000 because the lab was not in network. I think there are some laws, like there's a no surprise law or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think you can fight stuff like that, but it just an example of like how ridiculous it is.
What I was curious about, because we have other friends. We went to a Christian Science college, and when we've talked about, our experiences in Christian Science with them, they had just such different experiences. Like their parents were like kind of Christian Scientists, so they still went to the doctors. So I was curious, just so people had an understanding of what we grew up with, or I guess maybe it's the level of radical reliance our parents each had. But yeah, I just was curious what your guys' experience was, so we could probably talk about that, each of us.
Yeah. You want to start, Blair?
Oh, sure. Yeah, mine was, to give an example, my parents told me like stories of, when we were kids. I can't remember which one of us it was, but my mom would be very, very, she would tell me this story about when one of us just kind of stopped breathing as an infant, and they were freaking out, obviously, but then my mom talked about being in the car ready to leave and go to the hospital, but then instead of going to the hospital, they called my uncle, who was a practitioner, and they started giving him what the symptoms were, but then my uncle, I think, just cut them off and started giving them all the things we probably have heard throughout our lives, different passages from the Science and Health, as well as the Bible. And, my mom said the symptoms that one of us started experiencing was, that we were like turning blue, like we weren't able to breathe. And I think as I grew up and I started hearing the story from my mom, I was like, I think that's like SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, that she was describing.
Mm-hmm.
But she said after a certain amount of time, like the person, whoever it was, they started breathing again, and the symptoms started to fade, and everything went back to normal, like within 10 minutes or something. And I was like, that is so lucky. But I think the reason I even tell that story is because that's the level of reliance that my parents relied on Christian Science. When they had very extreme symptoms in their infant children, they would still be relying on a Christian Science practitioner versus going to the hospital.
Yeah. Well, and that was an interesting part of the video that we watched, was hearing about how that they literally got some laws enacted and changed in order to protect parents who were relying on something like Christian Science to bring healing for their child, rather than, because obviously, it could be considered neglect if your child were to die or become, seriously injured, and you not take them in for medical help. And so there were laws that were, I forget if they were brand new laws or changed laws or exactly how it worked, but basically there was a ton of legal work done by some Christian Scientists in the community to make sure that parents were protected if they were relying on Christian Science and something did happen. So, and those laws still exist today in most places around the U.S. So, yeah, I would say that my parents were pretty similar in terms of their reliance. For us as kids, I think that's an interesting thing about Christian Science, is sometimes were we just lucky? A lot of times, like, we never had any serious injuries or illnesses, at least not when I was growing up, and at least not within our immediate family. And so, someone might look at that and say, well, look, Christian Science was working for your family, it was protecting you. And others might say, well, it was very lucky, or maybe Christian Scientists have good genes, because sadly the ones who maybe had illnesses and other genetic issues passed down didn't make it very long. And so the ones that have kind of survived have better medical genetics, health genetics.
That's a really good point. I think that was something, sorry to cut you off, that's something that my mom would say over and over again, is like, well, I raised 5 children and, we never went to the doctor.
Yeah,
and
my mom would say
she actually said this when we finally did take her to the hospital. She had cancer and passed away. That's a whole other story we can talk about at some point, but passed away. She died. But she would, in the hospital, I remember her saying to the doctor, like, oh yeah, I've never been to the doctor in my 67 years, and I raised 5 children. And I remember looking at the doctor, and they were like, that is extremely lucky.
Yeah.
And not only that, all the boys in my family, which is 4 boys of the 5 siblings, we all played football for a number of years. None of us like broke any bones that we know of. I definitely have had a few concussions, nothing that a doctor could have done anything about necessarily anyways, but there is some aspect to it where I'm like, how is that possible? How did I play football and rugby for 10 plus years and not have a significant injury? But I don't know. There was also a part of me that remembers when I was playing, like in the back of my mind during football games, I'd be like, okay, you can't go to the doctor, so like maybe pull up on that hit a little bit.
Play safe a little bit.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But Jamie, you haven't described your parents' radical reliance. I'm curious.
It's surprising to hear about both of your parents, and I don't attribute you guys to having as much trauma associated with growing up in Christian Science, but maybe I'm wrong. But I feel like you guys both were just maybe a little more level-headed about it. But for me, without divulging too much personal information about my parents, I've seen my mom more specifically rely on it more radically, and I've tried to challenge her on it, and she's just very staunch in her mindset. And at the same time, like, who am I to try and change her mind? Like, it's what works for her.
Man, if I mean, I want to jump back to the first thing you said, which was like, maybe you guys don't seem like you had as much trauma around it. I feel like you have done more therapy and more work than either Blake or myself around just your mental health. So I think I haven't like fully dug into it, I don't think, in my therapy and what trauma is from it being raised in Christian Science. I think I'm only just starting to dig into those things.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out.
Yeah.
But the second thing you said.
Maybe that's it. Like, maybe it feels like you guys haven't necessarily talked about it as much. I'm sure there's plenty of trauma to go around, but I just haven't heard you guys talk about the specific ways that it really impacted you or affected you. But yeah, so yeah, I'm like finding a little bit of a block actually talking about how I was raised in it, because I feel like a little difficulty, because I don't want to like throw my mom under the bus, but I feel like her reliance on it is one of the main reasons I feel like my mindset is so warped around it, because I wanted to like please her and show her that I was being a good kid, and part of being a good kid was doing what she was doing. And I saw her so radically relying on it, and there's some moments where I can remember very vividly she was dealing with something, and was in bed and struggling with something, and it was just like she was really going for it. And to her credit, I don't have an understanding of what she was dealing with, but like, she hasn't gone to the doctor for it, I don't think, and she seems to be doing okay now. It was something that was flaring up at that time, but it's difficult to watch your parents be dealing with stuff or going through stuff. My dad, different than my mom, is now like doing more practical steps and not relying on it as much, but
probably because of you, right? And the things that you've brought to them about Christian Science.
He was always doing that without telling us. And he's just been a more practical person in general, and I didn't know it. And that's part of Christian Science, is nobody's talking about the things that they're doing. And so he wasn't telling us that he was going to the doctor and just getting general health checkups and taking medicine for certain things. And he has high cholesterol and never told me. And then I found out just last year that I have high cholesterol. I asked him about it, and he's like, yeah, I have high cholesterol too. And it's like, oh, that would have been good information for me at some point. But here I am figuring it out, and like, I'm making adjustments, and he's taking a statin for it. A statin is like a thing that helps you with high cholesterol, and it's something I might have to do in the future. But it's just funny stuff like that where it's
I feel like, Blake, we're taking a lot of the time here, so I do want to go back to your experience as well.
No problem. Yeah,
there's a lot for me to talk about in this area, just because, God, I was going to say the dangerous part is not only the radical reliance, but also what you were talking about with the not talking about things, not talking just in general. Like, okay, when my dad died, I remember going to my mom and being like, hey, so what did he die from? I would like to know that. And there was, since death isn't real, it's weird. Not only that, a quick aside, so life doesn't begin or end, since we are spiritual. And so growing up, we didn't say birthday. We never said happy birthday. My mom would say happy special day, or Christian Scientists would say,
oh really,
happy special day.
That's unique to you, because I had happy, and I think that's one of the spectrum things of Christians. It just depends on your parents. But
so that's a quick aside. But I ended up having, I think I talked to either my brother or somebody, and was like, hey, do you have like dad's death certificate? Because if he died of something that I should be looking out for and I should get checked, like, I would like to know that. So that's another danger of not talking about it. And then that bleeds into the other not talking about a thing. Like my mom dealt with something for a long time, and it took a long time for us to even know that something was happening. For me, and this might be more of a my relationship with her and not communicating as much, probably an aspect of it, but I didn't know she was dealing with something until she was basically house ridden, not bedridden, like, but house ridden. She hadn't left the house in several months. And so I just trying to talk to her about it when that was happening was like extremely difficult. And that ended up like impacting my relationship with my partner at the time, because she was like, what's going on? And I was like, I don't know. And she was like, can you ask? And should you be going to the doctor? And I was like, you mentioned to me, oh, she's just, my mom's going to do what she's going to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to say that. That's just what the situation is. Like, I can't change her mind. I can't change the way she believes. And
it's so deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the logic part of your brain that says, why don't you just go get this checked out? Just do a general health check. Like all that stuff. It's so, there's so much wiring that it's hard to explain to other people, like how challenging it is to explain that to your family. And
that's what I was going to say. I mean, for some of the things that still stick with me from growing up with it, is that's a big one. Oh, somebody's sick, don't ask any questions about what's wrong with them or what's going on. Now I have to kind of like consciously think about, okay, like maybe I should ask for more detail if it's appropriate. But that was it was all so secretive. If somebody was dealing with something, you just weren't going to talk about it. And there was a couple instances. I mean, my dad had something was going on for a little while. I knew it, but no one brought it up. No one addressed it. No one said anything about it. My siblings and I wouldn't even talk about it because it was just this deeply ingrained thing. Later on, now it's long past now, and he's fine, and we've talked about it since then. And he was dealing with this issue and ultimately decided that he was going to go see a doctor, and the doctor helped clear it up almost immediately, and it was like fine. And that's something that I think has helped me move past a lot of the issues that I was dealing with around Christian Science, is that my parents have come some ways from where they were. And I'm facing kind of the same dilemma as you, Jamie, where I don't want to I love my parents, they did a great job raising us. I still have some issues with Christian Science that, reasons why I don't like it, why I left. A couple of things that helped me were having a discussion with my parents where I said, I'm no longer a Christian Zionist, and I'm moving on from this religion. And they were really, really chill about it. Like, they were very understanding. Cool. They asked some questions, but they were like, well, you're an adult and you can make your own decisions.
Curious about what
and
those
they've taken
questions
steps
were.
in other areas to get medical treatment when they've felt like they can't get there with Christian Science. And I think they've been much more open about communicating when they're taking those steps in the medical world, because I think they understand now that we, as their kids, want to hear that information. We don't want it to be a secret. We want to know what's going on. And so they've been really good about, they're still in Christian Science and they still want to rely on that, but they also want to respect where we're at as their kids in terms of wanting to know what's going on with them, because I think they know it's frustrating when you don't know.
Yeah. That's cool of them to see that perspective. And I think my dad's kind of gotten there too. Like he's pretty open and talks to me about the things that he's doing, and it's just it's helpful, just to have that transparency for me.
100%. Yeah, the openness was kind of the thing that I probably take issue with, and I've probably swung the complete opposite direction, as children typically do sometimes. But when it comes to being open about things, or being open to new ideas or new ways of being in the world and living or being in relationship, it's almost like every single way that I knew the world to be when my dad died, and subsequently my mom, I started just, all right, what ways can we be in this experience that are different and just open to new ideas? Yeah. But I'm actually curious, Jamie, with what you were talking about with trauma, I want to know And what sort of things have popped up when you're in therapy, if you're open to discussing it? Like what trauma have you experienced or gone over in therapy from growing up in Christian Science?
Yeah, I think the one of the the most simple forms of it is realizing that I was living a life inauthentic to myself, that very early on in my childhood, I started to abandon who I was in order to please my parents and please my culture. Because I think very early on, it didn't make sense to me, and I didn't I didn't understand that's what I was experiencing because I so badly wanted to please. And that what I've learned in going to school for therapy is something called enmeshment, where I'm basically trying to make the emotions of my parents, and specifically my mother, a positive experience for them in order to make myself feel comfortable and okay. And so I really struggle now to know what it is that I want. And it's taken a lot of work in therapy to start addressing and saying no to things that aren't good for me or that I don't want to do. And so now that I'm starting to do that, it's feeling good, and I'm happy about it, but it feels like a lifelong struggle and trauma that I'm working through.
Do you also find that you continue to hide things a little bit, like sweep things under the rug when issues pop up? And maybe not even medical, but I feel like I sometimes have that instinctive reaction of, I shouldn't talk about this, or people don't need to know about this.
100%. I'll go through a struggle of, especially a lot of physical things. Actually, lately I've been experiencing pain in my eyes, and for a couple of weeks I was just like not talking about it, just sort of pushing through. And I think that's that Christian Science pain tolerance that we have. And for me now, I finally was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the eye doctor. Like I put it off for probably 2 months, but I think it's just like my eyes are getting worse, and they've been straining, and so I'm getting headaches and having more pain. But I just go through that for way longer than I should because it's what I'm used to. And there's also like financial stuff there. It's like I don't want to have to spend money, and if I don't need to, and maybe it'll go away or whatever it is. But
man. Yeah. That was, I actually remember having a finance related conversation because my relationship with money is terrible. That's something I definitely know I need to work on in therapy. Not only did I grow up in Christian Science, but I grew up in a very frugal, we'll say that, frugal environment. Yeah. And so my mom, she had fallen and very obviously kind of broke her arm, did not go get it fixed. And I had a conversation with her several months after the fact. By that point, she was like, oh, it's mostly healed. She didn't have a lot of flexibility in it. But I asked her like just straight up, I was like, is there like a big reason that you didn't go to the doctor, like financially motivated? And she's like, no. And to some extent, I believe that. But as she did end up going the medical route for her cancer later on through a last resort, I think it was less a financial thing and more of a fear-based thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah.
There's kind of a couple things I was hoping we could touch on maybe before we wrap up. And one of them you just touched on, Blair, which is the hypocrisy of Christian Science. Because even from the get-go, it can feel like a very hypocritical religion. Because if the whole idea is we are these spiritual beings, we should not be relying on material elements in any way, it starts to break down very quickly. And I remember I would have like friends ask me questions about Christian Science that like immediately I wouldn't be able to answer. They're like, okay, so you're not supposed to rely on medicine. Like, why do you need to rely on food? Why do you need a house? Like, the elements shouldn't affect you because that's material. And as a kid, I would just get stumped immediately. But I remember getting like defensive too, because somebody's questioning your worldview. And I wonder, I just wanted to ask you guys if you have any like specific memories or thoughts on the hypocrisy of it.
For sure. The one that comes to mind was and I had the same exact experience with having to, defend it or explain it to people. but it was the biggest one that I had the most difficult time was the dentist. I was like,
yeah.
So yeah, they're like, do you go to the dentist? I was like, yeah. And they're like, but why would you go to the dentist?
Yeah, what's the difference? Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. So
or
Mary Baker
doctor,
Eddy,
right? Glasses.
Mary Baker Eddy writes about it, and that's why. So Mary Baker Eddy talks about going to the dentist as an okay thing, and it's because of the time period she was in. I think he talks about it in that video. There's something about like once something is so obvious to you that you need to take care of or something like that, that you need to just go do it because you've already given it enough power. And so I think that like dental stuff was sort of that way.
Not only that, the other one was she wrote specifically, and it was again mentioned in this video. We'll link it just to make sure people can watch it. It's really good. But she wrote something to the effect of, if you are in so much pain that you cannot sit and do the prayerful work that is needed. I think she specifically called out morphine because that was like their main pain.
That's because that's what she did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
and that's
she was
the
like,
hypocrisy of it. Because who's to decide how much pain you need to be in to need to be reliant on medicine to get to the point where then you can use prayer for healing? It's like, where is that line? And no one can draw that except for you.
And there are a lot of, so like a funny thing too about Christian Science is there are a lot of Christian scientists who will say it is okay to go to the doctor if you feel that you aren't capable of handling it spiritually. But that's very family dependent, culturally dependent. There's more fundamentalist Christian scientists, and then there's more liberal Christian scientists. And so it's kind of just like this spectrum of experience for a lot of people. And if there are Christian scientists who are listening to this, I think that one thing the world needs more of is like acknowledgement of the pain that a lot of people have experienced. So I want to like acknowledge a lot of pain for a lot of people who've grown up in Christian Science and had to suffer and saw their family suffer as a result of the religion. Part of the benefit of going to therapy is being able to talk about those things and process through those things. And I don't think there's enough spaces for people who leave Christian Science to talk about it. Most Christian scientists just go off on their own and start living their life and figure it out on their own because that's what they know. And there are a lot of religious trauma groups that have been developed for other religions, but I haven't seen that for Christian Science as much. So that's something that I think is a benefit of us talking about it.
Us.
Yeah. And as three ex-Christian scientists, if you have anything you want to share with us or something like that. But yeah, it's something I've thought about for a while. Is just like, wait, we need more spaces for our generation to talk through it and figure it out.
Yeah, it's so true. Because after being like, okay, I'm not following this anymore, then for me, like as a young adult at that time, being like, I guess now I have to figure out this like medical side of things, of which I had no experience in, and I still feel very underprepared for like how to handle things. And a lot of times I just forget I need to be responsible for doing these types of things, like scheduling the doctor's appointment. And even when I go to the doctor's appointment, I forget sometimes to talk about something that is bothering me. Like I meant to bring up, like I get nosebleeds all the time just out of nowhere. And I'm like, it just occurred to me, I should maybe next time I'm at the doctor, maybe ask them if there's something wrong or something they can do to help me, because they're incredibly inconvenient. You just get them like when you're driving. And so maybe just to close things out then, speaking of leaving Christian Science, Blair, do you want to start with, was there like a moment or a series of moments where you're kind of disconnected you from Christian Science?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've said it a bunch now with the not fully bought in thing, but I definitely was never like, this is the way that I definitely want to live my life. It was more of this is all I've known in my life. And it wasn't, again, I think I've talked about it in another episode, but it wasn't just my immediate family either. Like it was also my aunt and uncle and my grandma and grandpa on both sides. It was very much my only experience and way of being in the world. But I think if I was to point to a specific example, like it was my dad dying when I was 24. At that point I was like, all right, like someone who dedicated their entire life to understanding their spiritual self and understanding Christian Science just ends up completely dying suddenly. What am I doing? What's the point of this? My mom, when I did confront her about this, it wasn't necessarily confrontation, but I was like, does my dad passing away, it's so crazy how embedded it is, but does dad dying have any effect on or bearing on like your reliance on Christian Science? And my mom would point to one specific example of a family friend they weren't Christian scientists. They went to the doctors consistently, and he had a heart attack and died. And she's like, yeah, you could go the medical route your whole life and have it happen too. So, but yeah, I mean, which, again, is true, but at that point, I was already in LA at that point when my dad died. And I moved back up north, and then I started exploring a different way of being in the world. And so that at that point I was like, I'm done. I wish I would have had a specific conversation with my mom, like you did, Blake, or with your parents, where you were like, I'm no longer a Christian Scientist. And what does that mean for our relationship, and whatever the other things you need to talk through might be. But
yeah, I think it did help give me some closure in that sense. Yeah. Jamie, how about you?
I definitely had an experience, I think I was a little bit older, actually. I think it was like 25, 26, where I started experiencing some medical symptoms that I was really struggling with. And I won't get into too many specifics, but I was just like, one of the symptoms was having allergies that were out of control. It was like, I was feeling like insects were almost like crawling in my nose, like itchy all the time, year round. And I wasn't able to figure out what it was. And I was afraid of going to the doctor at that point, but I had already abandoned Christian Science enough to know that I wanted to figure something out. And so I ended up finding, through the ex-Christian Scientist community, naturopathic, sort of holistic doctor who helped me navigate changing my diet to the point where it was a very intense diet, and it helped me open up my mindset to the idea that food is medicine, because a lot of Christian Scientists paid zero attention to what they're eating because the physical isn't real. So we just all eat fucking garbage our whole lives.
Yeah.
And so I radically changed my diet to adjust to try and heal some of this stuff and take some naturopathic medicines and things like that. And every single issue cleared up as a result of making those changes. I felt like that was, in that moment, I was like, this is the first time where I feel like I've had something akin to a healing that other Christian Scientists talk about, because I feel so free from, I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life like in this state of misery because I didn't know what to do, and I had solved it, and it was amazing. And so that was the point where things shifted for me. I ended up having a conversation like you did, Blake, at a certain point, telling my parents that I no longer am a Christian Scientist and that I drink alcohol. And it was after doing that diet that it gave me enough conviction to share that with them. And gosh, I'm so grateful for that period of my life. I think it's safe.
I feel like that typically is like the exit pattern, if you will, for Christian Scientists. I was dealing with this thing. I had someone I knew who was dealing with something. I'm not even kidding, like from 18 years old until like mid 30s, and trying to heal it with Christian Science, and then ended up just going to get a surgery that they needed. Finally went the medical route, healed it in like a month. And they're like, what the,
years of suffering, years of suffering,
and just completely healed in a month. So I think, I don't know if that person is out, but I'm almost 100% sure.
Yeah. What about you? What about you, Blake?
Well, I actually shared this on one of our earlier episodes, but there was, I mean, I was never like truly bought in as a kid. I don't think. I was sort of one of those things where like parents went, you start to meet friends at Sunday school, it becomes normal for you at some point as a kid growing up in it. But I always thought Sunday school was really boring. I never wanted to go.
You didn't really do the summer camps either, did you?
I never did the summer camp, so I wasn't like, I didn't build those
indoctrinated
friendships with, doing it over the summer as well as like throughout the school year. And so I was just never really bought in, but just kind of going through the motions. I think it was ingrained in me because I practiced it, quote unquote, for so long. But yeah, I was in college when we all met, and I had this stuffy nose or something like that, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna pray about it, and I like took a shower and I was like praying about it, and then like it cleared up, and I was like, wow, I just had like an instantaneous healing, like my first one ever. And then I think I must have been telling you about it, Jamie, and you're like, oh yeah, sometimes when I take like a hot shower, the steam like clears up my sinuses, and I was like, oh yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. And I was like, that is a much more logical explanation for what just happened than I just had an instantaneous healing. So I was like, that wasn't the moment where I was just like, okay, I'm done with this. But it was, I think, the first moment where I started truly thinking about it, where it wasn't just, I'm not just running on autopilot anymore. I'm actually giving this some thought. It took many more years to come to the full conclusion that like, all right. And you know, I got to a point where I was like, I'm not actively going to church. I'm not willing to put in the effort to be a Christian Zionist. So I can't call myself a Christian Zionist. And especially if I don't buy into it as well. So if I don't buy into it mentally, I'm not willing to put in the work, then I can't call myself a Christian Zionist. And so that's what I told my parents. I mean, I think at that point that I told them, I'd already been out of it for a while, but that was sort of like a good, it did give me some closure to be like, okay, I was a little bit worried about what their opinion was going to be, if they'd be disappointed or anything. And I think because the reaction was so good, that really helped me like disconnect from maybe some of the trauma maybe that you're experiencing, Jamie, or maybe there's still some more buried deeply that I'm not aware of, but there's definitely still a lot of those like instincts that kick in. And it's kind of crazy to see that happen sometimes and then take a beat and realize, oh, wow, that's definitely Christian Science talking. Yeah. But no, it was a good conversation, I think, to have as just sort of like all right, I'm moving on. I'm moving into a next stage of my life.
Yeah.
But how old were you at that point?
I was probably 28.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. So you'd probably been out of it at that point for a while.
28. Yeah.
But I think this probably will have a second part because I think there's still so much we can talk about in terms of Christian
there's probably
Science,
some specific topics that we could dive into more deeply. Yeah.
That we should.
I think it'd be cool to have other, guests on who've been Christian Scientists and talk about their experiences of trauma and
I met one out in the wild not that long ago, and I was like, I finally was like, we went a little deeper, and I was like, yeah, I grew up in this kind of small religion. She was like, what was the religion? I was like, oh, it's called Christian Science. We're like, oh my God, Alex, get over here.
It's literally the same thing just happened to me a few months ago. I know we were just talking about this the other day, but crazy, when you meet somebody else out in the wild, like you said, and you're like, what?
Oh,
how do you know about this?
And it was because the craziest part was when they were like started singing a hymn or something, and I was like, what? I was like, you did grow up in Christian Science.
Well, watching that video when he kind of goes through some like the Lord's Prayer and then the spiritual interpretation by Mary Baker Eddy. Wow, that it just all came back, I didn't realize it was still in there.
Yes, for sure. Well,
should we close out with a little like there is no life?
I knew you were gonna say
intelligence,
like, should we close out with
doesn't matter. I have one hilarious story about the scientific statement of being, which is at summer camp, we were saying it at Sunday school. And right when they were saying there is no life, truth, intelligence, nor substance in matter, one of the campers vomits all over the floor. It's just like, just perfect. Like, I don't know, just felt like the like opposite of what we were doing. Right. Like this one kid just super sick.
Oh no. It's too funny.
Yeah.
Well,
and also really sad.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that seems like a good spot to close it out. So yeah, if anyone's listening and still here and has experiencing Christian Science or really any kind of small religion like this where, you kind of had a similar experience of growing up with it, getting out of it, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. But that, I think we'll leave it there. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.